The experiment begins. The cold laboratory was silent except for the sound of machines humming in the background. The walls were smooth, metallic, and without windows. Bright blue lights flickered above, casting eerie shadows. In the center of the room, a large glass chamber stood, filled with a strange mist. Inside the chamber, a beautiful alien woman was trapped. Her name was Kyra. She had golden skin, long silver hair, and eyes that glowed like stars. She was different from the other prisoners. Stronger, smarter, more resistant. That is why the alien scientists had chosen her for their experiment. Kyra tried to move, but strong metal cuffs held her wrists and ankles. She had been inside this glass prison for many days. She did not know how long. There was no sense of time in this place. A group of alien scientists in dark robes surrounded the chamber. Their eyes were cold, their faces emotionless. One of them stepped forward. He was taller than the rest, with deep black skin and 4 glowing red eyes. His name was Sarnak, the lead scientist. "She is still resisting," Sarnak muttered, looking at Kyra. "Increase the dose." A mechanical arm lowered from the ceiling, holding a long silver needle filled with a glowing blue liquid. Kyra's heart pounded. She knew what was coming. She had already felt the effects of their cruel experiments. The needle pierced her skin. The burning sensation spread through her veins. The liquid was called the Desire Serum, a chemical designed to break her will. It would make her crave companionship, make her weak, make her need someone. But Sarah clenched her jaw. She would not give in. The aliens watched closely. The serum had worked on other prisoners before, but Sarah was different. She had a strong mind, stronger than they expected. Sarnak's lips curled into a smile. She fights it. Good. That means she is powerful, but she will break. They all break. Kyra's breathing became heavy. Her body trembled. She could feel the serum working inside her, trying to change her thoughts. But she forced herself to focus. She thought about her home, her people, and the promise she had made to protect them. She would not let these monsters control her. The laboratory doors hissed open. A new prisoner was being dragged inside. He was tall, muscular, and covered in cuts and bruises. His hands were chained behind his back. A human. His name was Commander Drake, and he had been captured during a space battle. He was not like the weak, scared prisoners the aliens usually took. Even in chains, he held his head high. His dark eyes scanned the room, sharp and alert. Sarnak walked toward him, smirking. "Ah, the human soldier. You are a rare find." Drake looked around. Then his gaze locked onto Kyra. He saw her glowing eyes, the way she struggled against her restraints. Something inside him tightened. She didn't belong here. Neither did he. "What do you want from me?" Drake asked, his voice firm. Sarnak chuckled. "Nothing. Yet. But you may be useful." He turned to his assistants. "Take him to the lower chambers. We will deal with him later." 2 guards grabbed Drake's arms and dragged him away. But just before he disappeared through the door, his eyes met Kyra's again. It was only a moment, but something passed between them. A silent understanding. As soon as the door closed, Sarnak turned back to Kyra. "Let's give her another dose." The needle lowered again. This time, the serum glowed even brighter. Kyra's body stiffened as it entered her veins. She could feel it pulling at her mind, twisting her emotions. She clenched her fists, trying to fight it. Sarnak leaned closer, whispering, "Soon, you will beg for someone to hold you. You will not be able to resist, and when that moment comes, we will control you." Kyra's vision blurred. Her breathing was ragged. She could feel something changing inside her. But deep in her heart, she still had one thought. She would never break. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the laboratory. The walls trembled. Alarms blared. The blue lights flickered, turning red. The aliens looked around in shock. What was that? One of them shouted. A voice crackled through the speakers. Intruder alert. A prisoner has escaped. Sarnak's eyes narrowed. He turned to the guards. Find out what's happening. Now. Zira forced herself to focus. Through the haze of the serum, she could hear the sounds of battle. Gunfire. Screams. Footsteps running down the hall. And then, the door exploded open. Smoke filled the room. Through the chaos, a figure stepped inside. His clothes were torn, his face bruised, but his eyes were full of fire. Drake had returned, and he was armed. Zyra's heart pounded. Was this real? Or was it the serum? Sarnak's face twisted in fury. Kill him. The guards rushed forward. Drake lifted his stolen alien blaster and fired. Bright energy beams shot across the room, taking down the nearest enemies. He turned to Zyra. Their eyes met again. Drake raised his weapon, pointing it at the glass chamber. Zyra barely had time to react before. Crack! The glass shattered. For the first time in weeks, Zyra was free. The human rescuer. The glass chamber shattered into 1,000 shards, scattering across the metallic floor. Zyra fell forward, her knees hitting the cold ground as she gasped for breath. The serum was still coursing through her veins, making her dizzy, making her feel things she didn't want to feel. Her limbs felt weak, but her mind screamed one thing: freedom. The blaring alarms and flashing red lights filled the room as Drake stepped forward, his weapon raised. His breathing was heavy, his body tense. The stolen alien blaster in his hand still glowed hot from the last shot. Smoke curled from its barrel. Sarnak stumbled backward, his 4 glowing eyes widening in shock. You? How did you? Drake didn't waste time with words. He fired again. The energy blast hit the nearest guard square in the chest. The alien let out a strangled cry before crumpling to the floor, smoke rising from the charred hole in his torso. Get up. Drake's voice was sharp as he reached down, grabbing Zyra's arm. His grip was firm but not rough. He didn't have time to be gentle. Zyra tried to stand, but the serum had weakened her body. Her legs trembled beneath her. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to move, but her mind was fogged with conflicting emotions. The serum was designed to break her, to make her desperate for connection, for someone to save her. But now that someone had come, she didn't want to be weak. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. I can walk. Drake didn't argue. He just nodded and pulled her along. Sarnak let out an enraged growl. Stop them. Do not let them escape. More alien guards stormed into the lab, their weapons raised. The air filled with the high-pitched whine of energy guns charging up. Drake pushed Zyra behind him, raising his stolen weapon. He was outnumbered. He knew it, but that had never stopped him before. He opened fire. The first alien dropped, then the second. The third managed to shoot back, and a bolt of red energy grazed Drake's arm. He hissed in pain but didn't stop moving. He spun, fired, took another down. Zyra watched him fight, so fast, so ruthless. Humans weren't known for their advanced technology. They weren't the strongest species in the galaxy, but they never stopped fighting. That was why the aliens feared them. She felt something stir deep inside her, not the forced desire from the serum, but something real. Drake grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the exit. Move. We don't have much time. Zyra pushed herself forward, ignoring the dizziness, ignoring the fire in her veins. She forced her body to obey her. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. They ran. The escape through the lab. The corridors were long and winding, illuminated by flashing red lights. The floor vibrated beneath their feet as more explosions rocked the facility. Drake had disabled the main power systems before coming to find her. The alien station was in chaos, security scrambling to contain the damage. It gave them just enough time to escape, if they moved fast. Zyra's mind was still clouded, but instincts took over. She remembered the layout of the lab, the places the guards didn't patrol, the weapons storage, The emergency escape pods. Left, she shouted as they reached a junction. Drake didn't hesitate. He turned left, leading them down a darkened hallway. "Where are we going?" he asked between breaths. "There's a docking bay at the far end of the facility," Tyra said. Her voice was still weak, but determination sharpened her tone. "We can steal a ship." Drake smirked. "Now we're talking." They kept moving, but behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. More guards were coming. Zyra's heart pounded. They wouldn't make it at this speed. Her eyes darted to a side room. A weapons locker. She recognized the symbol on the door. "There," she pointed. Drake kicked the door open, and they rushed inside. The room was lined with alien weapons, pulse rifles, energy blades, grenades. Drake whistled. Damn, these guys were packing. He grabbed a second blaster and tossed one to Zyra. She caught it, her fingers wrapping around the cold metal. It felt good. Right. Drake grinned. "You know how to use that." Zyra smirked, raising the weapon. "You'll see." The door slammed open, and alien guards poured in. This time, Zyra fought back. She moved on instinct, raising the blaster and firing 2 quick shots. Both hit their targets. One alien collapsed. The other staggered before Drake finished him off. They moved in sync, like 2 warriors who had fought together for years. More guards charged in, and Zyra reached for something else, a sleek, curved energy blade. She activated it, the blade glowing a bright violet. Drake glanced at her. Nice choice. She twirled it once in her grip. "Let's go." Together, they fought their way out of the room, blasting and slashing through the guards. They were close to freedom. The hangar bay. A final stand. They reached the docking bay, a massive open space filled with ships of all sizes. Sirens blared as alien soldiers scrambled to protect the fleet. Zyra's heart leaped when she saw it, a sleek black fighter ship, fast and armed to the teeth. "There," she shouted. But then, a new figure stepped into their path. A tall, armored alien with sharp, gleaming weapons. The alien commander. He was different from the guards, bigger, stronger, and smarter. His dark eyes gleamed with amusement as he looked at Drake and Zyra. Well, the commander said. His voice was deep, almost mocking. "You've made it far, human." His gaze shifted to Zyra. "And you should not be resisting." Zyra tightened her grip on her blade. The serum was still inside her, but she would never kneel to them. The commander drew his weapon, a massive, curved blade that crackled with energy. Drake raised his blasters. "You take left, I take right." Zyra smirked. "Let's finish this." The commander charged. The final battle had begun. Escape from the lab. The hangar bay erupted in chaos. Sirens blared, red warning lights flashed, and the metallic walls trembled from distant explosions. Zyra's breath came fast as she held her energy blade steady, facing down the alien commander. Drake stood beside her, gripping both his stolen blasters, his body tense and ready. The alien commander smirked. "I admire your spirit, human." His glowing red eyes flicked toward Zyra. "And you were meant to serve us. The serum should have broken you by now." Zyra clenched her jaw. She could still feel the effects of the serum, a dull heat in her veins, a strange pull toward Drake, an unnatural longing for connection. But she fought it. She fought it because she was more than a prisoner, more than an experiment. "You made a mistake," she said coldly. "You thought I could be tamed." The commander's smirk deepened. "I still do." And then he charged. His massive curved blade swung through the air, crackling with raw energy. Zyra barely dodged in time, twisting her body as the weapon slashed inches from her face. Sparks flew as it scraped against the metal floor. Drake opened fire, his blasters sending streaks of red-hot energy toward the commander. But the alien was fast. He twisted, deflecting the shots with his blade, each movement sharp and precise. Zyra lunged, her violet energy blade slashing toward his exposed side. The commander blocked just in time, their weapons clashing in a blinding explosion of light. The force sent shockwaves through the hangar, shaking the floor beneath them. Drake took the opening. He sprinted forward, ducking low, and fired point-blank at the alien's chest. The commander snarled as the shot slammed into his armor, forcing him back. But he didn't fall. He was too strong, too determined. Zyra saw his grip tighten on his blade. He's going to. The commander struck. He moved faster than a blur, his weapon slashing in a deadly arc. Zyra managed to block, but the sheer force threw her backward, her boots skidding against the floor. Drake wasn't as lucky. The blade slashed across his chest, tearing through his combat suit. Blood sprayed. Zyra's heart clenched. Drake stumbled back, gritting his teeth, his free hand pressing against the wound. The commander loomed over him. Weak. Zyra's rage ignited. The serum might have weakened her body, but it had done something else too. It had amplified her emotions. And right now, she was furious. She let out a sharp breath, and then she attacked. She moved faster than she ever had before, her energy blade spinning in a blur of light. The commander barely had time to react as she struck again and again, each movement fueled by anger and something deeper, something primal. The commander staggered, his armor cracking under the onslaught. For the first time, he looked afraid. Drake, still clutching his wound, grinned. Damn. Zyra twisted her blade in her grip, then plunged it straight into the commander's chest. The alien let out a strangled gasp. His glowing eyes flickered. Then he collapsed. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the hangar's alarm systems blared louder, snapping them back to reality. Drake forced himself upright. We need to go. Now. Zyra nodded, though she was still breathing heavily. The serum's effects were stronger than ever now, clouding her emotions. But she pushed it aside. Survival first. Finding the ship they ran. The hangar was a maze of towering ships, some sleek and new, others rusted and abandoned. Alien guards were swarming in, but their ranks were in chaos. Many were scrambling toward other parts of the facility, trying to contain whatever disaster Drake had unleashed earlier. They needed a ship, fast. There, Thyra pointed. A black stealth fighter sat at the far end of the hangar, its engines still warm, recently used, but currently unguarded. It was fast, armed, and best of all, big enough for two. Drake's smirk returned. That'll do. They sprinted toward it. Zyra sliced down a guard who got in their way. Drake blasted another. They reached the fighter, and Drake immediately began hacking into the controls. This thing's locked tight, he muttered. Give me a second. Zyra turned, scanning the hangar. More guards were closing in. We don't have a second, she warned. Drake gritted his teeth, his fingers flying over the alien controls. Come on, come on. The ship's interface beeped. Then, the cockpit door hissed open. Drake grabbed Zyra's wrist and pulled her inside. She barely had time to sit before he powered the ship to life. The engines roared, the hangar walls shook, and the ship lifted off the ground. The alien guards opened fire, their energy bolts slamming against the ship's hull. Drake grabbed the controls. Hold on tight. Zyra barely had time to brace herself before he punched the thrusters. The ship exploded forward, blasting out of the hangar in a blur of light. The stars rushed toward them, and for the first time in weeks, Thyra saw the infinite sky again. The chase through space. But the fight wasn't over. Enemy ships inbound. Thyra warned, her eyes darting to the radar. 3 alien fighters had already launched behind them, their weapons locking on. Drake grinned. Let's see what this baby can do. He jerked the controls, sending the ship into a sharp barrel roll just as the first laser bolts streaked past them. Zyra's fingers tightened on the co-pilot's controls, instinct taking over. I'll handle weapons. Drake glanced at her. You sure? She smirked. Try and stop me. She locked onto the nearest enemy fighter and fired. The ship exploded in a ball of flames. The other two broke formation, circling around for another attack. Drake pulled the ship into a hard turn, dodging incoming fire. They're fast. Zyra's hands moved quickly over the targeting system. We're faster. She fired again, one enemy ship down. The last fighter closed in, its weapons charging for a final shot. Drake's eyes narrowed. Then, he did the impossible. He cut the engines completely. The ship suddenly stopped mid-space, dropping below the enemy fighter, just as it rushed past them. Zyra didn't hesitate. She fired a final shot. The last enemy fighter exploded in a blinding flash. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Drake leaned back, grinning. Now that's what I call an escape. Zyra let out a slow breath. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear, but from something else. She turned to him. Drake met her gaze. He was still wounded, but alive. And in that moment, she realized, so was she. The mind battle. The stolen fighter ship soared through the darkness of space, leaving the alien station far behind. The glow of the station's emergency lights flickered in the distance, growing smaller with each passing second. But Zyra knew the fight was far from over. Drake gritted his teeth as he adjusted the controls, keeping his injured arm close to his chest. The wound from the alien commander's blade was deep. The cut burned, the edges singed from the energy blade's heat, but he refused to show pain. Zyra watched him from the co-pilot's seat, her fingers still tight on the ship's weapon controls. She was breathing fast, her body alive with adrenaline. But there was something else, something deeper, something wrong. She could feel the serum twisting inside her, a slow poison creeping through her mind. Her pulse pounded, but it wasn't from fear or exhaustion. It was from the artificial hunger forced into her veins. The desire serum had been injected into her for days. Its purpose was cruel, relentless. It was designed to break her, to force her into craving companionship, into needing someone else. And now, as she sat beside the human who had saved her, the serum's effects intensified. Her skin was warm. Her breath felt uneven. Her gaze flickered to Drake. His face was sharp with focus, his jaw clenched against the pain of his wound. His dark eyes scanned the controls, searching for a safe course. He was strong, a fighter. He had risked everything to save her. And the serum was whispering to her mind, telling her what she wanted. No, she clenched her fists. She would not be controlled. She had fought for her freedom, and she would fight for her mind as well. Drake notices something is wrong. Drake flicked a switch on the console, stabilizing the ship's speed. He let out a slow breath. They were in open space now, far from the immediate reach of the alien fleet. But they were not safe. Hyperdrive is warming up, he muttered. We need a destination. Zyra didn't answer. Drake turned his head, noticing the tension in her body. Her shoulders were stiff, her hands gripping the seat so tightly that her knuckles were pale. Her silver hair shimmered in the dim light of the cockpit. A sheen of sweat coated her golden skin. Drake narrowed his eyes. Like Zyra. She flinched slightly at the sound of his voice. His gaze sharpened. Something's wrong. She swallowed, forcing herself to speak. The serum. Drake's expression darkened. He knew about the desire injections. He had seen the alien scientists gloating about their experiments, their twisted methods of breaking prisoners. But Sarah had resisted them. Until now. Drake sat up straighter. How bad is it? Zyra's breathing hitched. It's... She exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to her forehead. It's in my mind. It's forcing me to feel things. I know they're not real, but they feel real. Drake cursed under his breath. She was fighting it, but for how long? He had no medical training, no cure, no way to counteract the effects. If they didn't find a solution soon, The serum could permanently rewire her emotions. "We need to land somewhere," he said firmly. "Someplace where we can figure this out." Zyra's fingers tightened against her temples. "No, we can't stop. The fleet. I'm not going to let them chase us across the galaxy while you're trapped in your own mind." Drake snapped. "We're landing." End of discussion. She turned her head sharply, about to argue. But then, the ship shook violently. Ambush from the shadows. A red warning light flashed across the console. The sound of the ship's alarms filled the cockpit. "Proximity alert," Drake muttered. His fingers flew over the controls. "We've got company." Zyra forced herself to focus, ignoring the storm inside her mind. She turned to the radar screen. Something was moving in the darkness of space, a massive, shadowed object. Then the stars shifted, and Zyra realized the truth. It wasn't an object. It was a ship, and it was waiting for them. A massive alien warship uncloaked in front of them, its weapons already charged. "It's a trap," Drake muttered. "They were waiting for us to escape." Zyra gritted her teeth. "They won't take me again." Drake's grip tightened on the controls. "Dan right. They won't." The enemy ship opened fire. Blazing energy bolts streaked toward them, cutting through the void of space. Drake yanked the controls, throwing the fighter into a wild, evasive maneuver. Zyra's hands moved instinctively over the weapons console, returning fire. The stolen fighter's pulse cannons roared, sending deadly streaks of energy toward the enemy ship, but their shields were too strong. "We need a new plan," Kyra said through gritted teeth. Drake's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the warship, and they couldn't outgun it. But there was one option left. His eyes flicked to the planet just ahead. A vast, dark world covered in jagged mountains and violent storms. "Brace yourself," he said. Zyra's breath caught. "What are you doing?" Drake pushed the thrusters to full power and aimed straight for the planet. The ship plunged toward the atmosphere at breakneck speed. The alien warship followed. Zyra's fingers dug into the co-pilot's seat. "You're insane." Drake smirked. No arguments there. The fighter slammed through the planet's storm clouds, disappearing into the chaos, crash landing on the unknown world. The impact was brutal. The stolen fighter tore through the planet's surface, skidding across rocky terrain before slamming into a jagged outcrop. Zyra felt the entire world shake as she was thrown forward. Her vision blurred. Her pulse pounded. Then, silence. Smoke filled the cockpit. The emergency lights flickered. Drake groaned, unstrapping himself from the pilot's seat. Well, that could have gone better. Sarah coughed, pushing herself upright. The ship was barely holding together. Sparks flew from the consoles. The engines were dead. Outside the cockpit window, the planet stretched endlessly before them, a dark, storm-racked wasteland. They were trapped. And worse. Zyra turned to the radar. Her blood went cold. The alien warship was descending. Drake followed her gaze. He exhaled slowly. "Well," he muttered, "guess we're not resting yet." Zyra gripped her energy blade. "No," she said. "We fight." The chase through space. The cockpit was filled with smoke. The sound of crackling sparks and groaning metal echoed around them. Zyra pushed herself up, her head pounding from the impact. Her body still trembled from the effects of the serum, but the crash had shocked her system, giving her a moment of clarity. Drake groaned beside her, shaking off the impact. His dark eyes scanned the broken controls, his hands moving swiftly over the console. The ship was beyond repair. Zyra turned to the radar screen, her heart sinking. The alien warship was descending fast, cutting through the thick storm clouds that swirled above the wasteland. "We don't have much time," she said, voice tight. Drake nodded. "Then let's move." They unstrapped from their seats, their bodies aching as they forced themselves out of the wreckage. The ship's main hatch was jammed, but Drake slammed his boot against it until the metal creaked open. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of burning fuel and storm-charged air. The world outside was nothing but jagged rock and endless darkness, illuminated only by flashes of lightning in the distance. The wind howled through deep ravines, carrying the echoes of something alive. Drake stepped out first, his blaster raised. Exira followed, gripping the hilt of her energy blade. Above them, the warship's lights glowed like hungry eyes, scanning the ground. "They're coming," Tyra murmured. Drake exhaled. "Then let's not be here when they land." Hunted in the wasteland. They moved fast, their boots crunching against the rough terrain. The planet's surface was unstable, the ground cracking beneath them, as if something massive moved deep below. Drake glanced over his shoulder. The warship was slowing down, preparing to land. Searchlights pierced through the dark, scanning for movement. Zyra's breath hitched. "They're going to find us." Drake's gaze flickered ahead, locking onto a jagged cave entrance carved into the mountainside. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her forward. Inside. Now. They darted into the cave, the shadows swallowing them whole. The moment they stepped inside, the roar of engines overhead vibrated the ground. Drake pressed his back against the cave wall, his blaster tight in his grip. Zyra did the same, her body still tense. The alien warship hovered above, its searchlights sweeping the area. The beams of light passed right over their hiding spot. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved. Then, the warship released its drop pods. Zyra's heart pounded as she saw the metallic spheres slam into the ground, releasing squads of heavily armed alien soldiers. "They're hunting us," she whispered. Drake smirked, though there was no humor in it. "They're welcome to try." Deeper into the darkness. The cave stretched deep into the mountain, the walls covered in strange symbols and markings. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Zyra ran her fingers along the carvings, something familiar about them. "These are ancient," she murmured. Drake exhaled. "Great. Let's hope the ancient ones left us something useful." The tunnels twisted and branched, leading them further underground. The alien soldiers were close, their voices echoing through the cave entrance. They could hear footsteps, the distinct hum of energy weapons being armed. They weren't just chasing anymore. They were tracking. "They must have a scanner," Zyra whispered. Drake frowned. "Then we make sure they don't find anything to scan." Without warning, he grabbed a rock and hurled it down one of the tunnels. The sound echoed loudly, bouncing off the cavern walls. The alien soldiers heard it instantly. "There, that way," one of them shouted. They turned and rushed in the wrong direction. Drake grinned. "Dumbasses." Sarah couldn't help but smirk. Not bad, human. But their luck wouldn't last. They had only bought themselves time. The ghosts of the planet. The deeper they moved into the cave, the more uneasy Kyra felt. The markings on the walls glowed faintly, as if reacting to their presence. Something about this place felt alive. And then, the whispers began. At first, it was faint, a distant sound, like the murmurs of voices long forgotten. But the further they walked, the louder the whispers became. Zyra's steps slowed. Her skin tingled. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Drake frowned. "Hear what?" The whispers grew louder, but only in her ears. She turned her head sharply. Something moved in the shadows. Her heart raced. She gripped her blade tighter. "Tyra?" Drake asked. She exhaled. "There's something here." Drake scanned the cavern, his blaster raised. "I don't see anything." But Kyra did. The shadows along the walls shifted, like figures watching from the darkness. Shapes twisted, reaching out, their movements slow and unnatural. And then, one of them stepped forward. Zyra's breath caught. A tall, hooded figure stood before her, its face hidden in darkness, but its eyes burned like fire. "You are not meant to be here," the figure spoke, its voice echoing in her mind. Zyra's body locked up. The serum in her veins burned hotter, reacting to the presence of this being. "What are you?" she whispered. The figure did not move. "You carry the poison of the enemy," it said, looking at her as if it could see inside her. Zaira staggered, feeling the serum twist inside her, reacting to the creature's energy. Drake stepped in front of her, aiming his blaster at the figure. "Who the hell are you?" The beam turned its gaze toward him. "The one who will decide if you live or die." Drake's finger tightened on the trigger. "Yeah, we'll see about that." The whispers grew deafening. The walls of the cave began to shake. The ground cracked beneath their feet. And then, everything went black. The truth about Zaira. Darkness swallowed them. For a long moment, Zaira felt like she was floating in an endless void, weightless and disconnected from her body. The whispers were everywhere, echoing through her mind, but they no longer sounded like voices of the dead. They were memories. Flashes of images burned through her thoughts. A civilization long gone, warriors standing in golden armor, the sky above them burning red. She saw a great battle, ships clashing in the void, energy weapons splitting entire planets apart. Then she saw herself, or at least someone who looked like her. A tall woman with the same golden skin, the same silver hair, standing atop a ruined citadel. She was fighting, not with fear, but with rage, power, and something more. She was leading. The realization hit her like a shockwave. This wasn't just any cave. This planet held the remnants of her people. She had been here before, long ago. Waking up in the ruins, Zaira's eyes snapped open. She was no longer in the cave's entrance. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deep, humming silence. The air around her felt charged, filled with ancient energy. She sat up. The walls of the chamber glowed faintly, covered in strange symbols that pulsed with life. There were markings of warriors, battles, and her own face, carved into the stone. Drake groaned beside her, his blaster still clutched in his hands. He blinked as he sat up, shaking his head. What the hell just happened? Zaira looked at him, her pulse still racing. She touched the carvings on the walls, feeling something awaken inside her. "This place," she whispered. "It's part of my past." Drake gave her a sharp look. "What do you mean?" Zaira turned to face him fully. "I think I'm the last of an ancient race," she said slowly. "And I think this planet, it belonged to my people." Drake frowned. "You're saying you've been here before?" Zaira wasn't sure. The images in her mind had felt too real to be hallucinations. The serum had weakened her, but it hadn't created those memories. She ran her fingers over the symbols again. "These are my ancestors," she murmured. "They fought against the same aliens who captured me." Drake stood up, gripping his blaster as he scanned the room. "Great, so we're in a tomb." He paused. "A tomb filled with what, exactly?" Zaira's gaze darkened. "A tomb filled with power." And then, the chamber shook. The awakening. The stone beneath them trembled. The symbols on the walls flared to life, pulsing in rhythm with something waking up beneath them. Drake tensed, raising his blaster. "Tell me that's normal." Zaira had no answer. Then, a deep, mechanical rumbling filled the chamber. The floor beneath them split apart, revealing a glowing pedestal rising from the ground. At its center was a device, an ancient weapon, pulsing with golden energy. Zaira took a slow step forward, her breath catching. "This," she whispered, "this is what they were looking for." Drake frowned. "Who?" Zaira's expression hardened. "The aliens who captured me, the ones who gave me the serum." She turned to him. "They weren't just experimenting on me to break my will, Drake." Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "They were trying to unlock my power." The warship descends. Before Drake could respond, the cave walls exploded. The alien warship had arrived. Zaira barely had time to react before a wave of armored soldiers flooded into the ruins, their weapons raised. Drake pulled her behind a pillar, his blaster already firing. The first alien dropped. Then the second. But there were too many. Zara clenched her fists, feeling the serum's fire burning through her veins. Her emotions were out of control, the effects of the injections fighting against her true self. The alien commander, the one she thought she had killed, stepped through the smoke, his armor scorched but his body very much alive. "You cannot escape fate," he growled, his 4 glowing eyes narrowing on her. "This place is a relic of your past, but you belong to us." Dyra's breath hitched. Drake fired, but the commander blocked the blast with his energy blade, deflecting the shot with ease. The alien soldiers surrounded them. Drake glanced at Tyra. Now would be a great time for some of that ancient warrior stuff. Zara stepped forward. The weapon in the pedestal was calling to her. She didn't know how, but she could feel its energy. Raw, powerful, and waiting for her to claim it. She ignored the commander's taunts. She ignored the soldiers closing in. She reached for the weapon. The moment her fingers touched it, the entire chamber exploded with golden light. Zyra unleashes her true power. The blast threw the aliens backward, their armor cracking from the sheer force of the energy wave. Zyra gasped as the power poured into her, filling her every nerve, every cell. The fog of the serum disappeared, burned away by the force of whatever she had just unlocked. She saw everything. The memories, the lost battles, the power her people had once wielded. It had never been about control or submission. It had been about survival. She opened her eyes. They glowed like stars. Drake stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Okay, that's new." Zyra turned to the alien commander, who was struggling to get back to his feet. For the first time, he looked afraid. She lifted her hand. A wave of energy blasted outward, knocking the remaining soldiers off their feet. The commander barely had time to react before she vanished in a burst of light, only to reappear directly in front of him. He swung his blade. She caught it with her bare hand. The commander's eyes widened in horror. Zyra's voice was calm, but filled with something ancient and powerful. "You thought you could break me." She shattered his weapon in her grip. Then she struck. A single pulse of energy erupted from her palm, sending the commander flying backward through the cavern wall. He did not rise again. Victory. For now. The remaining soldiers fled, their courage shattered. The warship overhead began retreating, its thrusters roaring as it vanished into the sky. Drake exhaled. So, that happened. Zyra turned to him, her new power still humming through her veins. "This isn't over," she said. "They know what I am now." Drake wiped a trickle of blood from his chin, smirking. "Good. Let them come." Tyra looked up at the sky, her eyes still glowing. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. And she was ready for war. The final stand. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal. The alien warship had retreated into the dark skies above, but Sarah knew it wouldn't be for long. The enemy had learned the truth. They knew what she was now, and they would return, stronger, angrier, more determined to take her. Zyra stood in the center of the ancient ruins, her newly awakened power thrumming through her veins. The golden energy of her ancestors still pulsed around her, the remnants of the old civilization now alive in her. She clenched her fists, staring up at the sky. "Let them come," she whispered. Drake stood beside her, his blaster resting on his hip. His face was battered, his body bruised, but his smirk remained intact. Humans never back down from a fight. "You sure about this?" he asked, cracking his neck. "Because I'd really love to steal a working ship and get the hell out of here instead." Zara exhaled. "If we run, they'll never stop chasing me." She turned to face him. "And I don't want to run anymore." Drake studied her for a moment, then let out a breath. "Well, guess I'm in. Not like I had other plans." He reloaded his blaster. "Let's make them regret coming after you." Styra gave a small smirk. They already do. Then the sky ignited. The alien warship had returned. The battle begins. The massive vessel loomed overhead like a metal storm cloud, its dark surface illuminated by the flashes of its charging planetary cannons. Zyra and Drake barely had time to react before drop pods rained from the sky, slamming into the rocky ground around them. The pods cracked open, revealing squads of elite alien soldiers, taller, stronger, armed with deadly energy rifles and reinforced armor. Drake sighed. Yeah, this just keeps getting better. Zyra didn't hesitate. She moved. With blinding speed, she surged forward, her energy blade igniting in a brilliant golden arc. The first alien soldier barely had time to react before she sliced through his armor, sending him collapsing to the ground. Drake took cover behind a broken stone pillar, unloading a barrage of blaster fire. His shots were precise, taking down one alien after another. But for every enemy he dropped, more took their place. "They're not stopping," Drake shouted. Zyra didn't answer. Her movements were too fast, too fluid. She was fighting like she had done this before, like she had trained for this her entire life. Maybe she had. She blocked an incoming strike, twisting her blade to knock the enemy back. She turned, ducked, slashed, every movement fueled by the power coursing through her. Drake saw it too. She wasn't just fighting like a warrior. She was fighting like a legend. But even legends had limits. The warship above roared to life, its massive cannons locking onto their location. A warning alarm rang out across the battlefield. Drake's eyes widened. They're going to wipe this whole area out. Zyra gritted her teeth. The aliens were ruthless. If they couldn't capture her, they would simply destroy everything, including her. But she wasn't going to let that happen. She reached out and called to her power, unleashing the storm. The energy that had been humming inside her exploded outward. The ground shook beneath her feet as she rose into the air, golden energy crackling around her body like a living storm. The ancient ruins responded, glowing in unison with her power. The alien warship fired. A massive energy blast tore through the atmosphere, rushing toward them like a falling sun. Drake braced for impact, but Zyra raised her hand, and the energy blast stopped midair. Drake's mouth dropped open. Holy shit! Zyra's eyes burned with golden light. She clenched her fist, and the energy blast reversed direction. The massive explosion slammed into the warship, tearing through its shields like paper. The warship lurched, fires erupting across its hull. The alien commander's voice rang out in a panicked transmission, but it was too late. Zyra lifted both hands, channeling the full force of her power. She tore the warship apart. The sky lit up with fire as the massive vessel broke apart piece by piece, debris scattering across the battlefield. The remaining alien soldiers on the ground stared in horror. Their leader was dead. Their ship was gone. Their entire mission had failed. And in front of them, standing among the ruins of her ancestors, was a woman they could not defeat. One by one, the remaining soldiers dropped their weapons and fled. The battle was over. Aftermath. Zyra slowly lowered herself to the ground, her energy flickering out. Her body was exhausted, her mind spinning, but she was alive. Drake approached her, his blaster still raised just in case. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dirt, but his eyes were full of something new. Respect. "You okay?" he asked. Zyra nodded slowly. "I think so." Drake exhaled, shaking his head. "You just took down a goddamn warship. Do you even realize what that means?" Zyra glanced up at the burning wreckage in the sky, the last remnants of her enemy vanishing into the void. "It means," she said softly, "that I'm finally free." Drake smirked. "Yeah. And it also means the rest of their kind is probably gonna come looking for you." Zyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Let them come." Drake chuckled. "Figures you'd say that." He sighed, glancing around the battlefield. So, what now? Zaira gazed up at the vast, endless sky. Her people were gone. Her past was a mystery, but her future, that was hers to create. "We find a ship," she said. And then, she turned to him, her eyes burning with determination. "We start a war."